Was reading Sports Illustrated last night about a football player. You may or may not remember this guy. His name was Todd Marinovich. His father raised him to be a football player, to be a professional football player. Just kind of like Bryce Harper. If you know anything about baseball, Bryce Harper was raised to be a football player, or baseball player. And of course, you know how parents are. Sometimes they want their kids to be famous or pretty or whatever. My sister raised her kids to be dancers. As stupid as that is. Unfortunately, of course, only one of them became a dancer. But she danced for the Chicago Bulls. She was a lovable. Anyway, it's my niece. Well, the rest of them kind of big-footed and hardly twinkle toes. Okay, I can say that. She's my niece, I can say that. They're my nieces. Okay. Anyway. Did we talk about this? I don't think we did. Let's go ahead and finish this chapter. Anyway, I was reading a story about Todd Marinovich. Todd Marinovich was raised as a football player. His father wouldn't let him eat ding-dongs or potato chips or pizza because he was trying to raise him as an athlete. Never drank pop. He always drank water or whatever. I don't know. Maybe tiger milk or whatever. Anyway, his father raised him that way. And what eventually happened was he rebelled. And when he rebelled, he started smoking pot. And according to him, he started smoking pot because he started smoking pot because he was he didn't have any self-assurance of his own, because his father tried to control every aspect of his life. So he didn't interact with other kids. He didn't know how to talk to people. He said that was his problem, so he started smoking pot, and it made him feel better. Well, he's 50 years old today. Guess what he does for a living? Well, guess what he does every day? Just to get by. Smokes pot, of course. The pot, of course, led to amphetamines, led to heroin addiction, as stupid as that sounds. Heroin addiction. He's been in rehab. He was a professional football player for the Los Angeles Raiders. Of course, he's from Los Angeles, but he was a football player for the Raiders. And they sent him to rehab. He's been in rehab over and over and over again. So how does he survive, I guess, is the biggest question. And the answer is he doesn't have any skills except for his football playing. Of course, he's 50 years old, so there are no 50-year-olds in football. And of course, he's not that good anymore anyway. He never was that good. He was that good when he was in college. He was a Heisman Trophy runner-up. He was drafted in the first round of the playoffs or something on the floor. I think it may be a battery or something. Okay, just in case. Anybody needs a double A? Triple A? Double A? Triple A? Double A? Double A. Okay. Anyway, that's Todd Marinovich. He gets clean and then he wanders around. Unfortunately, they've legalized marijuana in California. That wasn't in the article because they didn't legalize it until the last election. But Oregon had legalized marijuana, so he took his kids up to Oregon on vacation, and he had a choice between buying a pack of cigarettes or buying a bag of weed. And of course, he'd just gone through rehab, and he was trying to fight it off, and and of course, he couldn't do it. So he is back on marijuana, as strange as that may seem. I've got a copy. I can make a copy of the article if anybody would like to read it. It's about a football player, and it's about his dad. His dad has Alzheimer's disease now, and and he's trying to figure, of course the kid's trying to figure out the good, the bad, and the ugly about things. And as to whether he loves his dad or whether he doesn't love his dad, he's always raised as a special child. And his specialty, of course, was football. And his father was a coach. And the other people that he coached, of course, didn't turn out nearly as horribly as he did. But he turned out bad. Okay, so let's talk about, we're still talking about the geopolitics of drugs. Worldwide, 33 million people use amphetamines or similar stimulant substances. You may wonder, well, why in the world are all your figures from 2004? There's a reason for that. The federal government was, they were capturing all this information for an extended length of time, and then all of a sudden, at the beginning of the 21st century, people started saying negative things about guns. And Congress decided that they were going to change their laws about how you accumulated this kind of information. We used to talk about how many gun deaths were there in the United States, which state had more gun deaths than any other state. We don't talk about that stuff anymore because Congress passed a law that they couldn't accumulate that information. As stupid as that sounds, the FBI can't accumulate that information. No federal agency can accumulate information about gun violence and gun death. And you may ask yourself the question, why the hell did they ever do that? And the answer is, the NRA was so powerful, and the Republicans had taken control of both the Congress and the presidency, and so they did it for the NRA because they didn't want that kind of negative information. They didn't want anybody to try to regulate guns. And now we find out who was behind it. Who was behind it? Where did all their money come from for all this stuff? They pumped $13 million into Trump's election. So who was behind it? Are these patriotic Americans sending them $5 a piece? Where did the NRA get all their money? I know. This is going to come out in the Mueller investigation. Any ideas? Since I said Mueller, does anybody know who gave them all the money? Turns out to be Russian oligarchs. So the Russians are behind it. Oh, man. And I thought this was a good American organization. Anyway, yeah, that's the way it works. And unfortunately at the same time when they said we're not going to accumulate any information about guns, they also lost their ability to accumulate information on drugs. So we get some really bad information. We're not getting the same information we used to get. Last time we got good information was in 2004. In the United States, 16,000 meth labs were raided in 2004. However, meth labs have been partially controlled by controlling the precursor chemicals of ephedrine and pseudoephedrine found in common cold remedies. One of the problems that we have is that, one of the problems is things that are happening right now. We're seeing fewer, I know, who did this? Your friend Marius did this. The next time you see him. Anyway, okay, so the Fed started cracking down on the meth labs, and they were able to do that. Meth labs used to be like here. I mean, well, theoretically there's one 2.5 miles from here, from this campus. A meth lab. I don't have a clue where it is or who's doing it, or if anybody, I don't know, maybe they're selling it to the to the people in Mexico. I don't know. Maybe they're transporting there, or up north into Colorado. I have no idea. Anyway, not as many meth labs in the United States, but then again, the feds are cracking down on all this stuff. Now we're seeing crystal meth coming across the border. That's the new substance. So we're seeing a lot more meth coming across the border. If you look at the map, you can see that the #1 state for busted meth labs was Indiana, my home state of Indiana. 1,471 meth labs were busted in Indiana. Number 2 is Missouri. Number 3 is Ohio. So are there more meth labs in Indiana, Ohio, and Missouri than in any other state? Is that what we're seeing? Can we say that from looking at this graphic? Can we say that there are more meth labs? Well, the only thing actually that we can say is there are more busted meth labs in the state of Indiana, Ohio, and Missouri. When I was living up in Montana, you can see there's only 17 up here, but there's a lot more than 17 meth labs. Well, this is in 2004, of course. You know, there were a lot of meth labs in Montana, so what happened? Why didn't they just bust all those meth labs in Montana? And the answer is because the feds have a limited number of personnel, they have a limited number of resources. So they go wherever the people are. So if you got an empty area like Montana, you don't worry about the meth labs in Montana. Except then they found out that the meth labs, there was a lot of meth on all of the Indian reservations. There's 7 of them in Montana. So they got together with the BIA and they started busting meth labs. There's only 1 in Utah, 1 in Nevada. Yeah, that's about right. Nevada, Las Vegas. Isn't Las Vegas in Nevada? No, it's in New Mexico. Okay, there's 2 Las Vegas. They realized that they were killing off all of the natives in Montana. So the BIA got together with the feds, and they started busting meth labs in Montana. When was I there? I was there until 2010. About 2008, they had this huge drug bust that went all the way across the state on most of the Indian reservations, and they found all the meth labs. There were several of them on the Fort Peck reservation, and the reason it was on the Fort Peck is because it's a very large reservation, and there's a lot of empty space, and that's what you need to cook meth. I think I told you the story that my great-great-niece, used to cook meth in her house. And they ruined the house. It stinks, it smells real bad. Gets into the wood, gets into the plaster. There's not a whole lot you can do about it. You have to just knock the house down. And so when they caught her, and they found the meth in her house, they found the meth lab in her house, they contaminated the house, or she had contaminated the house. So they forced my brother to knock the house down. $8,000, cost him $8,000 to knock the house down. Of course, now you can't build anything there because the ground is contaminated. So it's kind of an empty lot that you can never do anything with. But it cost him $8,000 to knock the damn house down. Anyway, she used to cook meth in Indiana, so maybe she's one of the 1,400. There would be 1,470 if it wasn't for my great niece who used to cook meth. Treatment for amphetamine usage has skyrocketed in the past decade. In 1993, only 21,000 people sought treatment for amphetamine addiction. This figure had increased to 151,000 by 2004, just in 10 years. Other stimulants also make an impact on our lives. The use of caffeine in recent years has increased markedly. Coffee kiosks have sprung up in tiny towns, and sales of caffeinated soft and energy drinks have exploded. Full Throttle, of course. Red Bull's still really popular. Rockstar was real popular in Iowa. Monster seems to be real popular around here. You see these claws on people's cars. They have these things. They put them in their back windows. No? Okay. I see them. I think Monster's made by, isn't Monster made by the same people who make Mountain Dew? Mountain Dew's got a new drink, some kind of energy drink. I don't know. 18% of teens that's 4,300,000 have used Vicodin in the form of hydrocodone in 2004. Now the amazing thing about this is that the AMA just changed their protocol in 2001. In 3 years, they started giving people a lot more painkillers. So in 3 years, you can see that how the adolescents had taken over the drug market. It had just started 3 years before. In the old days, they used to give you a week's worth of pain pills. Now all of a sudden they gave you a month's worth of pain pills. Every time my wife has had surgery, she came out of the hospital with 6 weeks worth of painkillers. Of course, she didn't take them. She flushed most of them down the toilet. We could have made so much money. Could have bought a new car with the money. No, I'm just kidding. Hydrocodone is the most widely used and abused prescription opiate. 10%, 2,300,000 teens abuse the opiate Percodan in the form of OxyContin in the time-release version of oxycodone. Of course, you can snort this stuff too. You crush it up and then you can snort it. It's an opiate. Not a very good idea. Not a very good idea. Alcohol directly kills 75,000 people in the United States every year. 75,000 people every year. How many people died in Vietnam? 58,000? 58,000 people died over 11 years in Vietnam. Is that right? 12 years. And 75,000 people die of alcohol every year, directly. Alcohol directly kills 1.8 million people worldwide every year. 17.6 million Americans have alcohol abuse disorder. That's 8.5% of the adult population. These are people that have to stay away from alcohol. 8.5% of the population. It's a lot of people. Alcoholics make up 10 to 15% of people in hospitals, 10 to 20% of people in nursing homes, and of course, it ages you early. You die young. Younger than you would have been had you not been a drinker. When MRIs were done on gamblers, the portions of the brain that were activated by winning and losing were the same areas that were activated by cocaine. So some people have yes, there are some people with a cocaine addiction. However, there are some people with a gambling addiction. And of course, where was I? I was 3 minutes behind that wreck that killed those 2 people on the interstate on Thursday. Okay, and I got stopped right there at the casino. So I had to pee. So I went into the casino to go to the restaurant. Is that okay? I didn't gamble. I don't gamble. I don't do that. If I'm going to give my money away, I'll give it away to you guys. I'm not going to give it away to jeez, those idiots. Why would I give it away to millionaires? Right? I'd rather give it away to you guys. I think that's the 66 casino, Route 66 casinos run by the Laguna tribe, I think. Isn't it? Isn't Laguna Pueblo run that place? Okay. Anyway, I wouldn't mind giving it away to them, but how much do they get from that casino? If you own a casino, the guy that buys it gets it off the top. They get the money off the top. They built a casino on Fort Belknap. Of course, only the Indians are the ones playing at the casino. But it was the Chickasaw that built the casino, and they were getting 90%. The tribe only got like 10% until they paid for the casino. So the Chickasaw got 90%. And of the proceeds coming, and of course, almost all of it was the people from Fort Belknap were the only ones that stopped there and played. I don't know. Maybe I should have given the Laguna guy. I went across the street and got a Laguna burger, so I figured that's giving them some money too, right? I didn't have to gamble to give them money. All right. Anyway, statistics show that 2.5 million Americans are classified as pathological gamblers. 3 million Americans are classified as problem gamblers. So I'm in there, of course I'm walking around a little bit. I knew, you know, we were stopped. The policeman told me that it'd take them 20 minutes. All traffic would be stopped for 20 minutes while they life flighted these people out. So I just went, I was just kind of walking around. There wasn't anybody younger than 80 years old in there. I mean, everybody was on a walker, and they had their cards in there. And I don't even think you have to push buttons anymore. Just put your card in and it plays for you. And that's the way it works. Has anybody been to a casino lately? You don't drop the dimes in for the lever.
Like a one-arm bandit anymore? So
Yeah, just touch buttons. Of course, some of these people are so old, I don't think they could have touched those buttons. They got the card in the slot, but I don't know. A lot of really, really old people. So I told you I went to the restroom. Well, there were two guys in walkers and they're trying to get around each other, which means that, you know, they were blocking everything, so you couldn't get around them. Couldn't help them, you know, that's not right. They kept running into each other. It was kind of not that funny, it's not humorous, but they were pretty old. It took them about 5 minutes to figure out which way to go. They were trying to, one was trying to go to wash his hands, and the other guy was headed to the toilet, I guess, but they kept getting their wheels locked. 3 million Americans are classified as problem gamblers. 15 million Americans are at risk for problem gambling. And of course, you guys own Fire Rock. You have other casinos, don't you? How many? 3? That's yours? Ute Mountain. Ute Mountain's not yours. That's the Utes. Good. You guys are making money off all the crazy white people. I hope. One study in Minnesota in 2004 found that 1% of the gamblers accounted for 50% of the wagers. You can make money off of gambling, and these people try to do it. The more money you put into it, the more money you get back out of it, is the way it works. So that's why you've got 1% of the gamblers accounting for 15% of the proceeds. In the same year, among the riverboats of Illinois, 10% of the gamblers accounted for 80% of the revenues. So these are pathological gamblers. These are people that's all they do is gamble. And that's where all the money comes from. These guys win. 20% of the revenues come from the other people. They just kind of put money in the slot and probably don't even know how to play the game. And they just lose their money. And everybody's happy because, well, everybody's happy. Donald Trump used to own casinos in Atlantic City, and he sued American Indians because American Indians had access to gambling in most of the states, and he couldn't get access to gambling in most of the states. You know, so he sued you guys. Well, not you guys specifically. At the time, the Navajo didn't have any casinos. While gambling may be the most economically devastating behavioral addiction, there are others that are equally personally devastating. Compulsive overeating, of course, anorexia, bulimia. And anorexia will kill you. Bulimia usually doesn't kill anybody, but it is still an addiction. Internet addictions, where people won't stay off the internet. Those of you who are on your telephones right now, do you have a telephone addiction? My wife talks to Google all the time. Google, wake up, Google. I don't remember what she says. She's got this code that she talks to Google. And then Google tells her anything that she wants to know. Now the question is, does Google know more than I do? That's the question. Sometimes she checks me to find out if I really know what the hell I'm talking about on Google, to find out if Google agrees with me, which is kind of interesting. Sexual addiction, of course, excessive TV addiction, compulsive shopping. There are compulsive shoppers out there. And then pornography addiction. Pornography is the #1 reason for people to access the internet, as odd as that may seem. Nobody in here may have ever looked at pornography, but the reality, there's a lot of people that do. There are people that can't stay away from pornography. If they've got a computer at work, if nobody's looking, They go to their pornographic sites. As strange as that may seem, even though most companies are monitoring what their employees are doing. Anyway, pornography addiction. And we really won't be talking about pornography addiction, as strange as that is. That may be the addiction of the future. That may be, it's not in the DSM-5, but that may be the biggest problem that we have. If you've ever watched the movie Clockwork Orange, it's a movie from the 70s. They were talking about pornography addiction. Of course, this is the 70s before the internet, so it was a very interesting movie. And it's fairly pornographic, so if you ever watch the movie, be aware that there will be some strange things in there. Okay, so how do drugs get into your system? That's really what we need to talk about. Who has problems with addictions? Psychoactive drugs are substances that directly affect the central nervous system. If they didn't affect the central nervous system, you wouldn't use them. The methods that the drug gets into the brain are called pharmacokinetics. Kinetics means movement, pharma means drug movement. So how does it get into your brain is the question. The first thing that has to happen is it has to be absorbed into your system, one way or the other. It has to be distributed to your system. It can't just stay in one place. It has to make it all the way up into your brain. Then it is broken down, it's metabolized, and eventually it's eliminated from your system. If it doesn't do this, if it's not absorbed into your system, then it doesn't work. It's like putting something in your mouth. If it doesn't break down in water, then you won't taste it. In order for you to taste something, you have to get chemicals off of it. So even if you drink water, there's minerals in most waters, or Coke. Is that coffee?
Yeah, coffee.
Okay, I was just wondering. Okay, so you put it in your mouth. It's kind of bitter, a little bit.
That was a little bit of coffee ground. That's why I made that face.
So if you can't absorb it, then you don't taste it. And the next thing, it has to go through your system. Eventually, it's metabolized and taken out of your system. And we'll talk about that in just a second. So one of the things we have to talk about is how does it get into your system? The route of administration. This lady is, I can't remember what they call this, puffing or something. She's got that straw. She's cooking opium with a cigarette lighter, and she's sucking the smoke into her lungs. And so she's taking it into her system. The speed that it transmits to the brain, how fast does it get into your brain? The affinity for nerve cells and neurotransmitters. How does it change things? If it doesn't change things, you probably won't use it. When a psychoactive drug can get to its target in the central nervous system rapidly, the more addictive it tends to be. And we didn't realize this. We realized this with cocaine. We were looking at people that were drinking. Alcohol gets into your system, but it takes a while, doesn't it? I mean, first you put it in your mouth, and then you swallow it. It goes into your stomach. The first beer you may not even get any effect at all. Then you drink the second beer, and all of a sudden it starts getting into your system. The alcohol starts getting into your system. It has to be absorbed through your stomach lining. So the question is, how fast does stuff get into your system? Well, we didn't really understand any of this until people started smoking crack cocaine. Crack gets into your system almost immediately, almost instantaneously. And what we discovered was that crack, when you smoke crack, it's almost instant addiction. And that's the same thing we discovered with crystal meth. If you smoke it, you've got a crack pipe. Crank pipe. My cracks and my cranks and stuff. Crank is crystal meth. Anyway, so if you've got a crank pipe, then it gets into your system almost immediately. It's addictive the first time you smoke it. It's such a rush that it's addictive almost instantaneously. So the faster it gets into your system, the more addictive this stuff is. So wait a minute, so if crank works this way and crack works this way, what about tobacco? And the answer is yeah. Now, it's really odd that we didn't understand how addictive tobacco was until people started smoking crack and crank. And now, of course, we know just exactly how addictive it is. It turns out to be the most addictive substance known to man is nicotine. Gets into your system almost instantaneously. So congratulations. Inhaling, when a person smokes a psychoactive substance or draws it in as vapor, as with nitrous oxide, or inhaling an active chemical solvent, colloquially referred to as huffing, the drug enters the individual's lungs. And if it goes into the lungs, it has all of those blood vessels to attach itself to. And so it's absorbed into your system almost immediately. So inhaling a substance is the fastest way to get it into your system. It's rapidly absorbed through the capillary lining of the alveoli of the bronchi, and this is one of the reasons why tobacco became so addictive to people, and people didn't realize it. And the medical community wasn't allowed to talk about it, despite the fact that Sigmund Freud was a cigar smoker, and he lost his lower jaw to cancer. So despite all these reasons, all this proof that there was that tobacco was a very destructive substance, nobody was allowed to say anything about it. Why? It was an addiction that everybody wanted. It was not as bad as alcohol. We hear that excuse with marijuana. Well, marijuana is not as bad as alcohol. Okay. Well, that's what they said about tobacco. It's not as bad as alcohol. Of course, at the time we were drinking, 7.1 gallons of alcohol every year. Pure alcohol per person every year. That's a lot of alcohol. So yeah, alcohol is very destructive. And it's stupid that we allow it to be utilized, because it kills people. So let's replace it with something that doesn't kill as many people. Wait a minute. Well, now we know that 135,000 people die a year because of tobacco, 75,000 people die because of alcohol. So which one is worse? Well, tobacco doesn't make you nuts, and it doesn't make you beat your kids up or rape people or whatever. Alcohol seems to be the precursor for a lot of violent behavior. People use alcohol as an excuse for doing things, unfortunately. And people rarely use tobacco as an excuse for doing things. So all of this has to do with politics, as strange as that may seem. For the longest time, we knew that tobacco was hurting people, but we couldn't say anything because the tobacco industry was so powerful. And this was a political issue. This was totally a political issue. Politicians from tobacco-producing states, Kentucky, Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, Tennessee, those states controlled whether we said anything negative about tobacco or not. And since they were so powerful and they were making so much money off of the tobacco industry, we didn't say anything. And then all of a sudden things changed. And that's one of the reasons why you see these advertisements on television telling you how bad tobacco is. They used to play games. They used to have light, tar, and nicotine cigarettes. Well, it didn't really make any difference. They're all bad. They gave you snuff so that you could dip Copenhagen and put it between your cheek and your gums. How did they get it into your system? Well, they put fiberglass in the tobacco. As horrible as that sounds. I know. I think I will chew on some leaves and maybe some fiberglass. That'll make me feel good. And the fiberglass cuts your gums, cuts your lip, and it got it into the system faster. So you're actually cutting yourself. I think I'll cut my lip so the tobacco will get into my system, the nicotine will get into my system faster. And people actually did that. The psychoactive substance travels through the body with the blood and is pumped into the brain and the tissues of the body, and they reach the brain as short as 7 to 10 seconds. So if you smoke or you pull something into your lungs, it's going to get into your system very, very rapidly, between 7 to 10 seconds. So if you've ever watched anybody who's been sitting in a conference for an extended length of time and then they finally got outside to smoke a cigarette, they'll take a big long puff of the tobacco, they'll pull it down into their lungs and they'll hold it there for a couple seconds and then they'll puff it out. And as they're puffing it out, they're actually having a dopamine rush. It's actually getting into their system. And it's almost like they're sighing, I've got the nicotine in my system, I'm okay now. And of course, I never smoked, so I'm standing there watching, I'm going, really? Oh, man. You just breathed in a whole mouthful of bad breath, man. Come on, you gotta be cool about this. Inhaling is the most rapid method of getting a psychoactive substance into the system. Individuals are able to control levels and reactions of the psychoactive substance known as titration by regulating the frequency and use of the depth of inhalation. If you've ever been around people who smoke, you went outside to be with these individuals and talk to them while they were smoking, they did a lot more holding than they did smoking. Every once in a while they'd bring the cigarette up to their mouths and they would take a puff. And then they'd hold it in their fingers and they'd talk for a couple more minutes. And then they'd take another puff of tobacco. Well, if they had just smoked that cigarette, kept it in their mouth, and sucked in and blew out, and sucked in and blew out until the cigarette was gone, then their titration would have been a lot higher. But what they do is they just stand there and hold the cigarette. And then they puff it every once in a while when they needed another dopamine rush. As strange as that may seem, and this is known as titration. You may have talked to somebody that only puffed once or twice on that cigarette before the damn thing burned all the way to the end. If you suck on it and draw that tobacco into your lungs, you can smoke a cigarette in, I don't know, a minute and a half. I mean, it burns relatively quickly if you're pushing air through there. You can burn it fairly quickly. But most people will stand there and smoke a cigarette for 5 or 10 minutes because they never take a puff. Anyway, that's known as titration. How much do you actually pull into your lungs? Since smoking is an inefficient means of administering psychoactive properties of marijuana, of course it's the THC that you're talking about, 60% of the substance is lost. So these individuals that are saying, we have to legalize marijuana because my child has seizures and they need marijuana. Well, what they actually need is a CBD oil. They don't really need the THC. And the other problem is we don't know what that marijuana is going to do to those children. We don't know what it's going to look like 15 years down the road. Are they going to die of another cancer? Is that what's going to happen? We have no clue. We don't know. But of course, it's stopping their seizures. So people want to legalize marijuana. Well, that doesn't make a lot of sense. We could, we could legalize medical marijuana without legalizing marijuana. Pharmaceutical companies are working on aerosol and nasal sprays to deliver the THC. One of them is Marinol and the other is Dronabinol. And of course, these we would squirt as aerosols up their noses. This method would also eliminate the tars and the toxic substances that make marijuana carcinogenic. Anytime you smoke anything, and I just had a fire in my wood stove last night. All that smoke coming out of there. There's stuff in that smoke. I think I burned pine and oak last night. So whatever was in the pine and the oak. There's always something in smoke. Of course, I'm not down there trying to draw all that smoke out of the fireplace, out of the wood stove. But there's always something in there. I mean, it gets on the side, you have to clean out your stovepipe, right? Okay. Okay, so inhaling is a really good way to get stuff into your system, but there are other ways. We can get stuff into our system in other ways. Injecting is where the individual introduces the psychoactive substance into the body by using a hypodermic needle and a syringe. There are 3 methods of injecting appropriate psychoactive substances into the body. There is intravenous, which means into the vein. You shoot it directly into the vein. As humans, of course, our veins are right on top of our skin. So, yeah, you can see he's got pretty good veins. You can see he's got pretty good veins here. He's got one in the middle, he's got one over here. He's got pretty good veins. So it's not that difficult to hit a vein. Colloquially, this is known as slamming, injecting it directly into a vein. This method delivers a psychoactive substance through the bloodstream into the brain in about 15 to 30 seconds. And what they will do is they'll put a tourniquet on their arm, they'll inject it into their vein, and then they'll pop the tourniquet, and it will rush up into their brains, and they'll get what they refer to as a head rush. It feels almost electric because it all goes right into the brain. I was watching a movie last night, and this guy shot up with heroin, and it showed him having a head rush. He shot it, and about 5 seconds later, it hit his brain, and his eyes just started flipping up and down, and his pupils became pinpoint. It was really kind of fascinating to watch. So if your pupils become pinpoint, what are you looking at? We're not seeing anything out there. You're looking internally. So that's why your eyes go pinpoint. That's how we used to tell if somebody had been shooting up with heroin. In the old days, of course, we didn't have OxyContin and hydrocodone. We would look at their eyeballs to see if they were pinpoint. And we could tell if they had a stroke because their pupils would not be the same. They wouldn't have bilateral dilation or other problems. That's how we could tell. So you can inject it into your vein, or you can inject it into your muscle. This is known as colloquially as muscling. If you've ever been in the hospital and they had to give you a shot of something, they should probably shot it into your gluteus maximus in your butt, and of course that is intramuscular injection. This method introduces the psychoactive substance through the bloodstream and into the brain in about 3 to 5 minutes. This method will not create a head rush, but a slower buildup of euphoria. And of course, the nurses aren't trying to give you a head rush, so they're injecting it into your muscles, and then it's being absorbed from your muscles into your bloodstream, and then of course it gets into your system completely. Okay, so we can either inject it into your vein, into your muscle, or we can shoot it underneath your skin, and this is known as skin popping. It's subcutaneous. We inject it under the skin. Where's my coat? What did I do with my coat? I was on the Fort Belknap Veterans Powwow Committee, and one of the years that I was on that committee, actually 2 of the years, there was a guy who was a skin popper. He had the most god-awful scars on his arms from skin popping, but he had been a skin popper. He was also a Vietnam vet, kind of a mess. But his arms look like this, both sides, both arms look like that. Eventually, he kept losing the money. You know, we would accumulate all this money for the powwow, and somebody would rob him, and it just kept happening. Every time we went to Great Falls, somebody would find out that he had all this money, and they would break into his room, and they'd steal all of his money. You know, and he'd hide it in places. And I got the whole story. You know, so one time he hid it in an extra pair of jeans that he had. It was down in the coffin. He'd roll his jeans up, you know, like a good soldier. And the guy stole his jeans, and when he stole his jeans, he stole his clothes. Okay, so this kept happening. Oh my goodness gracious. Anyway, it was a skin pop. This method of introducing psychoactive substances through the bloodstream introduces it into your brain in about 3 to 5 minutes. Doesn't cause a head rush, but it's a slower buildup of euphoria. Skin popping. I never saw him skin pop. Actually, they were fairly old scars on his arms. He had been a skin popper at some point in his life, and so his arms were permanently scarred, just like that. Makes the most perfect little circles you ever saw. Kind of amazing. This guy's not really dead. This is kind of like a zombie movie or something. He's not really dead. And there's a way you can tell he's not really dead. For one thing, look how pink he is. Look how pink his body is. He's not really dead. Injection is the most dangerous method of introducing drugs into the body because once they are entered, there is no turning back. So if you shoot somebody up in the muscle, there's nothing you can do to suck that stuff back out of the muscle. It's gone. Once you shoot it into the vein, it's gone. And if you shot too much, you're dead. And there's nothing you can do about it. Well, there are some things you can do about it. One of the things, you can give them a drug that counteracts whatever you put into their system. So if it is an opiate, you can give them Narcan. Which blocks the effects of the opiate. Injecting also introduces the user to a whole host of contaminating infections, such as hepatitis B, hepatitis C, syphilis, and HIV. I was working in medicine before HIV. I was working in medicine before hepatitis C. So in the old days, all people cared about was syphilis and hepatitis, which turned out to be hepatitis B. Then hepatitis C came around, and then HIV came around. And all of a sudden it was dangerous to be an IV drug user because you might be injecting yourself with a disease. The individual is also more prone to abscesses and embolisms. All of these things do really interesting things to your body. Nicotine, if you smoke cigarettes, nicotine has an affinity for your platelets, and it makes your platelets sticky. So what does that mean? When you smoke cigarettes, it means you're more likely to have a blood clot. Last March, my friend died of a heart attack. He was a smoker. As soon as he had a heart attack, he was pretty much gone. His heart attack wasn't as severe as mine. I had a heart attack in 2010, but mine was worse. But because he's a smoker, when he had his heart attack, and he had his openings were actually larger than mine, but because he was a smoker, they clogged up with blood clots, and he died. It just doesn't work that way. I don't smoke. I didn't smoke. I was a weightlifter, so I was a lot healthier. So when I had my heart attack and my blockage, I was able to survive with no damage. And he had a less severe heart attack, and he died because he was a smoker. And of course, it killed him. And they've looked at my heart. They've gone in to my heart with a heart cath, and they looked all over my heart. They can't find any scar tissue. They can't find any problems at all. My dad had a heart attack when he was in his 60s. And of course, this is before they did heart caths. So they had to crack his chest, and they replaced some of his veins. Half of his heart was dead. The whole back part of his heart was dead, my dad. And he lived for another 20, 25 years because he was a fairly healthy guy. But he had a lot of damage to his heart. I had no damage whatsoever, as strange as that may seem. If you're a good boy, you'll live through these things. And if you're a bad boy like my friend, who smokes cigarettes, all that sticky stuff makes your platelets sticky, you're more likely to have a heart. If you have a heart attack, you're more likely to die from it. The recovery is not as quick. Mucous membrane absorption, select psychoactive substances that come in a powdered form can be inhaled through the nose and absorbed in the capillaries found in the mucous membrane. Cocaine, heroin, methamphetamines, you can grind up hydrocodone, OxyContin, and well, it's the same stuff, and get the same effect. People will snort cocaine. People will be addicted to snorting cocaine. Well, this isn't a really good idea. Cocaine is a vasoconstrictor. It makes your blood vessels almost go away. It constricts them. Well, that's how you feed your body. That's how you keep yourself healthy, is with blood circulating through your system. So if you snort cocaine and snort it on a fairly regular basis, what you're doing is you're forcing your body to have this constriction of blood vessels. People that snort a lot of cocaine, especially if they snort it up through their noses, they will kill the cartilage in their noses. If you kill that cartilage, I mean, this is living tissue. This isn't, you've got to keep feeding it. If you stop feeding it, then that cartilage will die. And if you die, you'll get a hole between your two nostrils. Or the bone will just go away. I mean, the cartilage will just go away. So all of a sudden you have a nose that looks like this, and all of a sudden you've got a nose that looks like this, because all that cartilage is gone. So all of a sudden you get a pug nose. You got no cartilage here. As interesting as that is. Who's the singer? Linda Ronstadt has had her nose reconstructed twice because of snorting cocaine. She is younger than I am. I'm 69. She's 67. She's just come down with Parkinson's disease. Now there's a possibility that her Parkinson's disease is genetic. There's also a possibility that all that coke she snorted has created a problem in her brain, and now she's got Parkinson's disease. So she's going to be relatively non-functional for the rest of her life. Same thing happened to Michael J. Fox. He became a famous actor. He was on that strange television show. He started making movies. People kept feeding him cocaine. Next thing you know, the guy's got Parkinson's disease. Parkinson's disease is caused by a trauma to your brain. A lot of times people with TBIs will develop Parkinsonian symptoms. In this case, of course, we've got two individuals that develop Parkinson's disease from their drug usage. And we see this a lot in the rock stars and country stars. The more they insult their brain, the more likely they're going to have a problem with it. Okay, so what are we talking about? We're talking about mucous membranes, aren't we? Okay. This method is much more rapid than oral ingestion. It bypasses most of the body's defenses. Your digestive acids, your enzymes in your liver try to break all this stuff down. So if you take a pill, and I took pills this morning. What's happening now is I'm digesting those pills. I've probably digested them already. I took them with V8 juice, that it's worth a vegetable or something. I get credit for a vegetable. I took it with V8 juice. So all that stuff's breaking down in my stomach right now, all the chemicals. Of course, I take one of my medications. Mine are high blood pressure medications. And so all that stuff is surging through my system. But if I could bypass all this stuff, if I took my blood pressure medicine in another method, other than by swallowing it and forcing it through my digestive system, I'd get a lot more medicine into my system. Because what's happening now, the digestive acids are breaking it down, the enzymes are breaking it down, and eventually, it forces its way through the liver to break it down. Besides snorting through the nose, there are two other methods that we use that can be used. One is buccally between the gums and the cheek. That's what we do with snuff. We put it between our cheek and gums, just a little bit, just a little pinch between your cheeks and gums. Okay. Up north, everybody, especially the rodeo guys, they all have a circle on their breeches, on their butts, on their pockets of their butts, because they had that Copenhagen in their back pocket, whether they use it or not. Oh God! And they spit into clear containers, so you get to look at their tobacco spit. That's nice. So here I am, I'm teaching, and you've got, like 5 guys spitting into these bottles. Oh, it's nasty. Anyway, but just a pinch between your cheek and gums. The other is sublingually. If you put it under your tongue, oddly enough, you can put things under your tongue and it doesn't get into your mouth. Your tongue will keep it there. And it's also a very sensitive area. So if somebody has a heart attack, one of the first things they will do is give them a nitroglycerin tablet, and they'll put it under their tongue. They don't put it in their mouth because it will break down the enzymes in their mouth will break it down. So they have to put it under their tongues to get it into their system. If you take that pill and you pull it out from underneath your tongue and start playing with it with your tongue, on top of your tongue, you will dissolve the pill and you won't get any into your system. But if you leave it sublingually, if you keep it under your tongue, then it gets into your system relatively rapidly. During my heart attack, they kept giving me nitroglycerin, but I couldn't dissolve it. It wouldn't dissolve under my tongue, so it wasn't doing me any good. We laughed about that. It's supposed to take away the heart palpitations. I know, that's an ugly picture. Absorbing drugs through the mucous membrane in the rectum and the vagina are also possible. Individuals have been known to soak tampons in alcohol and then place those tampons in their vaginas and get drunk really, really quick. It really absorbs it into your system really fast. Males who don't have vaginas, males have penises, females have vaginas. Okay, I learned that on a movie about little kindergarten kids. Okay, males sometimes will do the same thing in their rectum, as strange as that may seem. Working in the emergency room, I pulled lots and lots of strange things out of people's rectums that you wouldn't believe, and you're asking yourself, why? Why would you do that? But anyway, I never got an answer. This is usually administered as a suppository, but it can also be used for recreational drugs. You can put ketamine up there, you can put cocaine up there. It's just like snorting it down through your nose. If you put it in any other mucous membrane. LSD, remember LSD, they discovered LSD by splashing it in their eyes. Well, it's mucous membrane that's covering your eyes, protecting your eyes. Got into their system through their eyeballs, as odd as that may seem. You can put it up your nose, any place with mucous membrane. Put it in your mouth, now that would work as well. But, of course, really cool people, they use their extremities, I guess, as strange and stupid as that sounds. Ketamine is a rape drug, so you got to be careful. Makes you forget things. GHB. Oral ingestion, when a drug is swallowed, it goes through the esophagus into the stomach. It passes into the small intestine where it is absorbed by the capillaries and the mucosal lining of the intestine. This method requires about 20 to 30 minutes. So if you take an aspirin, I've got a headache, so I take an aspirin, or I take ibuprofen, or I take Tylenol. It's going to take it 20 to 30 minutes to get into your system. It all depends on what's in your stomach at that time. If your stomach is empty, and first of all, you should never be taking aspirin on an empty stomach. It'll burn a hole in your stomach. It will cause ulcers. You got to be really careful about these things. So it'll take about 20 to 30 minutes to get it into your system. So those people who take an aspirin and then their headache goes away almost immediately, it's a placebo. It's a placebo effect. They think that it's going to go away, so it goes away. A lot of headaches have to do with muscle tension around your skull. So if you can relax that tension, then your headache will go away. Placebo effect. So you might as well take a Tic Tac. If you think it's going to work, it will work. If the psychoactive substance is a beer or other alcoholic beverage, about 10 to 20% of the substance will be metabolized by the stomach. Okay, so remember, we drank that first beer and it didn't do anything to us. Well, one of the reasons is because, well, it's only got 3.2% alcohol in it anyway, and here you drank it, and 10 to 20% of it was metabolized by your stomach. So how much of that alcohol got into your system? Well, only about 2% got into your system. Males tend to metabolize alcohol faster than women, and thus they get drunk slower than a woman who consumes the same amount of liquor. So if you're a female and you're matching shots with somebody, don't do it. It's a trick. Don't do it. He's trying to get you drunk if he's matching shots, especially if he's been drinking longer than you have. The other problem that women have is that you have less alcohol dehydrogenase in your system. You evolved that way. I don't know. I don't have any clue why it's the way it is. Women get drunk a lot faster than men do because of the alcohol dehydrogenase and the fact that, well, there are a lot of different reasons, and we'll show you those reasons right now. Well, not right now. When you gotta go, right? Most psychoactive substances are fat soluble, and so they move readily across membranes. Alcohol is both fat and water soluble, and that's why you get drunk so rapidly. It's being utilized by your entire system. Wait a minute. We figured out that my watch doesn't work. Okay. Transdermal absorption. Drugs are now being impregnated on adhesive patches so that the medication can be slowly absorbed through the skin. There's a new contraceptive that you stick it on your hip, I think. I don't know. I don't remember. I see it on television from time to time. Some of the patches provide medication for up to 7 days, though it may take as long as 2 days before the therapeutic level of the drug makes it into your system. This is transdermal. So it has to be absorbed through your skin into your system. It's not a very rapid way of getting drugs into your system. Because of the various factors, psychoactive substances in the blood do not remain in the system for the same length of time. This is known as bioavailability. There are various factors that restrict the availability of psychoactive substances to the target tissue after administration. So we've got all these factors that have something to do with something. Once the psychoactive substance enters the bloodstream, it can be transported inside the blood cells, and this is all the pharmaceuticals. We know how these are being transported. We know whether it's attaching itself to the blood cells. We know whether it's going through the plasma or whether it's attaching itself to a protein molecule. We know all this stuff because they've studied it. So they know how this substance is getting into your system. If you take aspirin, how in the world does it get into your system? Well, it attaches itself to a blood cell, and that's how it gets into the system. If you take Tylenol doesn't attach to the blood cell. It just goes through your plasma. This is the liquid portion of your blood. We know that. We know exactly how it gets there. The psychoactive substance will visit every organ in the body where it will either cause an effect, it will be ignored, it will be stored usually in the fat cells, or it will be biotransformed. So it'll either do something, it'll do nothing, or it will be just stored. And this is the problem with THC. If you smoke marijuana, it gets into your system and it stays there. It may not have very much of an effect on you, but it stays in your system for an extended length of time. It's stored in your fat. Some drugs, such as Valium, are biotransformed. So you take a Valium tablet and it breaks down into 4 psychoactive substances. And those 4 psychoactive substances have different effects on people. Sometimes one of those 4 will cause a really severe reaction. If you drink alcohol, one of those 4 will have a synergistic effect. It will multiply the effect. So you have to be careful of what drugs you're taking. You have to tell your doctor because he knows all the drug interactions. Or at least he's learned all the drug, and hopefully he has anyway. Of course, biotransforming is you break it down into various psychoactive substances. While the chemical structure of the drug is a factor in distribution, so is the size of the individual. A lighter person with less blood volume will have less blood to dilute the chemical. So if I can take 2 tablets of ibuprofen in order to make my headache go away, what do I give my 35-year-old grandson? Well, I can't give him 2 tablets, I'll kill the kid. I'll blow his liver out. He's just 35 pounds. I'm 185 pounds. So he can't take the same dosage that I take, can he? The blood volume of an adult is 6 to 8 quarts of blood. Children have 3 to 4 quarts. Okay. I used to have a student that bragged about keeping his kid quiet by blowing pot smoke into his face. That's how he'd quiet him down. His son would be all bouncing all over the place. So he'd blow marijuana smoke into his face and mellow him out. Well, okay, so the marijuana's doing one thing to him. Of course, this was a baby. This was, a 15-pound baby, and he weighs 150 pounds. So when he takes the marijuana smoke into his body, it does one thing to him, but this is only a 15-pound baby. And then he complained that he had a problem with the baby's behavior. He was stoning the kid. And when you're not stoned, you're grouchy. I don't know if people that smoke a lot of pot. When they're stoned, they're okay. But when they're not stoned, they're grouchy. Than they would have been if they had never smoked pot. And now he's done that to his kid. Oh, that's abuse. Oh, man, that was so stupid. I wanted to shoot the kid. He also wanted to borrow my car, so he'd go out to the lake. I had a Jeep. He wanted to borrow my Jeep. Organs with extensive vascularization will be affected by a drug to a greater degree. This is one of the reasons why cocaine can cause fatal heart reactions. Too much of the drug affects the highly vascularized heart, causing the heart to arrest. Some people, the first time they smoke or first time they snort cocaine, they have a heart attack and die, no matter how healthy they are. Remember, cocaine is a vasoconstrictor. It makes the blood vessels really, really tiny. Well, the blood vessels in your heart aren't very big at all. They're very, very small. So these individuals snorting cocaine, of course, they're going to have the really good high, but at the same time, they may have a heart attack, especially if they have any kind of heart problems whatsoever. Arrhythmia, heart palpitations. Their heart may just stop beating and not start again. If you have arrhythmia and you need a pacemaker and you snort cocaine, you're forcing your heart to stop beating. And then it may never start again. And these people die of heart attacks, as ugly as that is. Anyway, this is one of the reasons why cocaine is so difficult, is so dangerous. Humans would have died from bacteria, viruses, and toxins at the beginning of our evolution if it weren't for the ability to keep most of these substances out of our central nervous system. The walls of the capillaries that feed the nervous system consist of tightly sealed epithelial cells that only allow certain substances to penetrate. And this is known as a blood-brain barrier. Just because you take it into your body doesn't mean it's going to make it all the way to your brain. A lot of substances will not make it into your brain. And this is a good thing. This is a good thing because bacteria can't get through those capillaries. Viruses can't get into those capillaries. The brain is very rich. It has a lot of fats. It has a lot of fat in it. If there's any area of your body that bacteria is trying to infect, it would be your brain because it's such a rich medium. But it can't get in there. And the reason is because of the blood-brain barrier. However, there are chemicals that do make it into the brain. As happened to Amy Winehouse, as you can plainly see. Luckily, for those who need a chemical assistance on their lucidity, psychotropic medications do cross the blood-brain barrier and change your serotonin or your GABA to reduce the symptoms of depression, anxiety, or whatever your problem may happen to be. I mean, otherwise Prozac wouldn't work, but Prozac does work. Of course, you have to build up a certain amount in your body. Alcohol wouldn't work. It affects your GABA level. Also affects your serotonin level. Also affects your dopamine level. These substances, you wouldn't be drinking alcohol. It would just taste like that crappy stuff that somebody gave me and I didn't like. And if it didn't affect you, then you wouldn't drink it. The reason you drink is because it affects your brain. It makes you drunk. It does something, makes you happy. I don't know what it does to you. It makes you happy, makes you forget things. The chemicals that people use as psychoactive substances also will cross the blood-brain barrier. Otherwise, they wouldn't be taken because they wouldn't have a brain reaction to the drugs. The reason psychoactive substances cross the blood-brain barrier is because the brain is very fatty, and most psychoactive substances are fat-soluble or lipophilic. Nicotine, alcohol, and marijuana are very lipophilic. And of course, the brain has an affinity for these substances. One of the things that we discovered, I was working in a hospital in Omaha, St. Joseph Hospital, and there was a section of the hospital called Boys Town Institute. And Boys Town Institute was trying to figure out why there were so many people with, at this point we didn't know what FAS was, fetal alcohol syndrome. This was back in the 80s. And the individuals were experimenting with FAS. And the reason they were doing it in Omaha was because there were 2 Indian reservations just north of there, and they had really serious problems with FAS. Not only that, South Dakota was just north of Nebraska, and there were several reservations where they had problems with FAS. So we had, this was an area that was being affected. So they did a lot of experiments. One of the things they discovered was alcohol has an affinity for brain tissue. They did experiments and they discovered that alcohol has an affinity for brain tissue. Well, as we are going to find out, the infant brain, the blood-brain barrier isn't mature until they are about 2 or 3 years old. So if you've got a neonate, if you've got a fetus growing in your gut, in your womb, of course, and you drink alcohol, the alcohol has an affinity for brain tissue. Well, it's going to make you drunk, but look what it's going to do to the baby. It's going to change the baby's brain tissue. It's going to go right to the baby's brain tissue, as sad as that is. It also has an affinity for heart tissue, and so one of the effects of FAS is it creates heart anomalies for the baby. So, and these are all really serious tragedies. So how long does this stuff stay in your system? Well, it takes amphetamines 2 to 4 days. It can be detected in your urine for 2 to 4 days. You can see all these drugs, how long they stay in your system. Phencyclidine, PCP, stays in your system for 7 to 14 days. THC stays in your system from 15 to 30 days. It all depends on how fat you are as to where it goes and how long it stays in your system. The more fat you have in your system, the longer it will stay in your system. So it can be detected in your urine for 15 to 30 days. What else do we have? TC. Methamphetamine, 3 to 5 days. So if if you have to take a drug urine test to get a job and you've been having a good time, hopefully you haven't had a good time with marijuana, because it's going to take you forever to get that stuff out of your system. It's going to take you a month to get that stuff out of your system. My son used to work at a bar in Los Angeles, in Hollywood, and for some reason all the rap singers were talking about smoking pot in the clubs. And he worked at a club, of course. So these guys were always blazing up in the club, and of course that's against the law to smoke in a club, let alone smoke marijuana in a club, which was illegal at the time. And so my son had to take a test. He was scared that secondhand marijuana smoke would cause his test to be positive. So he knows he's got to take a test like in a week. So these individuals are lighting up their blunts on close to him, and he's jumping over the bar and he's slapping it out of their hands. And I guess you can take marijuana and you can spray it with Windex, and it makes it non-functional or something. Anyway, so he's got this Windex bottle. He's wandering around shooting people's pot with Windex. Wasn't a very popular club after that, you can imagine. And my son's not a very very big guy. He's only about 5'8". He only weighs about 100, maybe 200 pounds. But he's solid muscle. I mean, he's all shoulder, the kid. Anyway, nobody argued with him. He just took their pot away from them. How much time do I have? Drugs that are completely fat soluble will cross the blood-brain barrier very rapidly. Drugs that are only partially fat soluble will cross the barrier much slower. Marijuana, of course, is completely fat soluble. This is the case with morphine, which crosses the barrier much slower than heroin does. This form of crossing the barrier is known as passive transport. And of course, this is all very important as to how quickly it gets into your system and how long it stays in your system, how long it's going to affect you. Heroin affects you a shorter period of time than morphine, but it has a stronger effect than morphine does. We have to stop right here. We'll talk about active transport next time. We'll talk about some of the things that really screw you up. As you get older, you can't break down chemicals